History is never old. Everything that ever happens continues to happen. What we are dealing with now is more than the second rise of Europe. We're dealing with the rise of a concept that has taken hold of the mind of most of the world, and people throughout the world are now fighting to get away from that concept, and a whole lot of people are prisoners to that concept.
The holy day season rolls on, and it's only right that the first day of the year is also the birthday of the man who, in my opinion, is the first among our Grandmaster teachers. Now, of course, we all have a Grandmaster teacher who we're particularly fond of, but Dr. Clarke is my personal favorite. In terms of significance, Dr. Clarke is kind of like the moon landing. Everyone remembers where they were when they first encountered this sagacious individual. Perhaps you saw him speaking on Gil Noble's program, or Tony Brown's journal, or one of Listervelt Middleton's programs. Or perhaps you were one of the very lucky few who actually had the privilege of seeing Dr. Clarke in person. Very few academics, even among our Grandmaster teachers, can claim to have such a profoundly charismatic effect on those who meet them. And with good reason. On a side note, Dr. Clarke was from Alabama. Yeah, the same Alabama that gave us the Riverside Reckoning and, of course, the chairman of Alabama, so he comes from good folks. Dr. Clarke was inspirational for a ton of reasons, one of which being he was a real Renaissance man. He was largely an autodidact. That means he taught himself. In time, his body of knowledge and ability to draw coherent conclusions from the material he studied turned him into a bona fide academic. He taught at both Hunter College and Cornell University. But just like his colleague Dr. Ben, he took every chance he could get out of the libraries and out into the field. When speaking on subjects like the Battle of Setra, Dr. Clarke could speak with true authority because he had actually gone to these places himself. His takedown of Mary Lefkowitz became the stuff of legend, but then again, what else would you expect from a man who was a living legend? With that one, Dr. Clarke demonstrated that a debate, properly structured, isn't a debate at all. It's a lesson being taught to a willfully ignorant person. And there were few people who knew how to make the lesson stick quite like Dr. Clarke. And we have to mention his decades-long friendship with Dr. Joseph Ben-Jochannan, the only historical intellect that rivaled Dr. Clarke. The two of them were an incredible duo, and truth be told, I can't think of any two academics who have become so synonymous with one another. They couldn't have been more different, at least on the surface. One was a foundational Black American, the other one an immigrant. Dr. Clarke was more soft-spoken most of the time, and he expressed himself with eloquence and a poetic form of explanation. Dr. Ben, on the other hand, was like a bull in a china shop with his discourse. He was erudite and showed superior knowledge of everything he spoke on, though he occasionally peppered his lectures with colorful language, which Dr. Clarke never did. I guess it was these differences that helped these men to complement each other so well. Ordinarily, one would say that when we lost Dr. Clarke, we lost one of our best, and while it is true that he was one of our best, it's also true that Dr. Clarke hasn't been lost to us at all. He preserved his knowledge and analyses in his books and lectures. All we have to do is read it and watch it. He knew that he could never complete the monumental task of uncovering and examining the history that went into our current condition, but he wasn't betting on that. The same way he took the work of his predecessors and took it to the next level, so we too must take his work and go to the next step with it. As Dr. Clarke said, all history is a current event, and that includes movements of ideological growth. And that was a large part of what made Dr. Clarke so compelling. He wasn't teaching history. He was giving us the backstory to why the world we live in is the way it is, and also helpful recommendations on how to set things to rights. January 1st is Dr. John Henrik Clarke's birthday, and for me, that makes it Dr. John Henrik Clarke Day. I'm sure that a number of you can think of your own memories and appreciation of him. Feel free to share those in the comments section. A people cannot claim to be empowered unless they act in their own interest, unless they choose for themselves what is important to them. No one can be allowed to have veto power over that. The society can hate who these people hold dear, but if a people are operating in their own interest, they will exalt these individuals regardless because it's in their interest. As Black people, we don't need to worry about whether the rest of the world validates our heroes. Dr. Clarke taught us we live in a world that runs on anti-Black racism. Anti-Black racism has become the unifying principle of much of the planet. So if they don't approve of the people who we hold in high esteem, that means we're on the right track. We revere Dr. Clarke for the unique intellect he was, but we love him for the fact that he was just like any of us. We have to regain our senses and get back to honoring and remembering our ancestors. When you do, you draw strength from them. Dr. Clarke could never achieve black empowerment for us, but he could instill in us the desire and the righteousness of it, and that empowers us all. So on this day, we salute our Grand Master Teacher. We rededicate ourselves to the values and principles that he fought for and upheld his entire life. We sharpen our intellectual and physical skills so that we're ready to defend ourselves against any manner of attack. But most of all, we seek to understand, not so that we can simply brag about what we think we know, but so that we can take the information that we learn and put it into practice. That was what Dr. John Henrik Clarke wanted for his people, and that is why we must honor him.